Now I will walk through how to access the SAHF carbon calculator and some basics about the calculator through a short tutorial. Please first navigate to SAHF's website, and you'll find the calculator under our environmental sustainability webpage. And then scrolling down to low carbon homes, and here we have our portfolio level tools. Through there, you will first find the SAHF calculator. We recommend anytime that you do use the calculator that you navigate back to this page, as if there are important updates, this will ensure that by clicking on here that you'll get the most up-to-date version. We have 3 different resources on this page. We first have the calculator itself. It's an Excel spreadsheet tool that you can download and use. We also have an example here that has sample data in it, so you can see how that comes together through the different tabs. And as well, we also have detailed instructions, a PDF that goes into more information around what each of these tabs and calculations are. If you have any questions or any feedback, please don't hesitate to reach out to sustainability@safenet.org. Now that you've downloaded the calculator, go ahead and open it up. It should automatically take you to the Introduction README tab. You need to start on this tab every single time that you do a new version of the calculator. This calculator is specifically focused on doing property level calculations of your Scope 1 direct emissions and your Scope 2 indirect emissions. It then totals it up to portfolio level emissions and provides you an opportunity to add on any missing fuels, any missing renewable energy assets, etc. So I'll walk through it now, but to note, we focus on Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We do not include Scope 3 carbon emissions in this portfolio calculator at this time, but could happen in the future. So now that you've navigated here, let's just orient yourself a little bit more. There are 3 different color cells within this calculator. The blue cells are informational, and they give you more information and instructions on how to use the tool. The green cells are where you as the user will be inputting information regarding your properties or any other assets that you have. The gray cells are where calculations will be done, and we encourage you to not edit those unless there's specific instructions to do so. So let's start up here first. First, enter in your portfolio name. And then down here, you can select from your different years as to which you want to calculate your carbon emissions. Right now, we have 2016 through 2020 available. This is based on e-grid data from EPA. On an annual basis, EPA releases new data. This data was just released for 2021, right when we were publishing the calculator. So look for an update later this year where we will incorporate 2021 data. Once you've selected your year, also put in the date that you're doing these carbon emissions calculations so that you know when you go back in the future. Great. Once you set this information, you'll notice that it'll then populate on the top of all of these other tabs, so you can be rest assured that you're working in the correct file when you go to it. Next, I'm going to walk through how to gather data from Energy Star Portfolio Manager and then pull that information into the calculator here. I'll also talk briefly about information you will need to gather if you don't use Energy Star Portfolio Manager, but we highly encourage that you look through this table over here in order to better understand. So what we've done is we've specifically set up a template, and I recommend that first you go and log into your Energy Star Portfolio Manager account, and then you click on this link right here. If this link does not work or you have problems clicking on it, we've also provided it down here where you can copy and paste that link into your browser. Once you get there, you should be able to click on that template and then develop a report where you can actually specifically check off which buildings you want to include within the calculator. We recommend that you include all buildings, regardless of if they have only owner paid receipts or if they have owner paid receipts and tenant data. The reason is that we will sort that data once it gets into the whole building data tab, but this makes for a simple copy and paste of all your properties by selecting every building that eventually you would like to have calculated through this calculator. Again, if you do not have Energy Star Portfolio Manager, you can still use this. This is the information that you will need in addition to this incomplete data information below. And the goal would be to then gather this all up through whatever process you have and then input it in the whole building data tab. If you don't even have any energy data, that's okay. You would automatically then go to your incomplete data entry requirements down here and then to that incomplete data tab. Now that you've generated a report through Energy Star Portfolio Manager or collected your data from your other benchmarking platforms, it's time to put your data actually into the calculator. So navigate to the whole building data tab and scroll down to I-15. This is where you're going to copy and paste your data into the tab. So I'm going to copy and then I'm going to paste my data. Once you populate the data in this, you'll notice that some flags start to pop. And it says up here that you have 3 properties that failed the EUI check. What is the EUI check? The EUI check is specifically using the Department of Energy's Better Buildings Challenge range, in which they typically define as having whole building data. So if your source EUI falls between 70, 500 EUI, or kBTU per square foot, then that means that you likely have whole building data. Now, this is mostly true in a lot of different cases. However, there are efficient buildings out there that perhaps are below that 70 EUI. That's why we don't automatically do it. We give you the option at this point to decide to move it over to the incomplete data tab and use aggregated baseline information instead, or to keep it here and use the data that you have. So for this specific example right here, this DC Apartments, I know that this is a really efficient property, and actually 48 EUI is typical for this property. And I would like to go ahead and keep the data that's in here and use it to do my calculations for this property. So in selecting keep, you'll notice over here that we went from saying not applicable to actually being calculated out across here, and then it'll show up over in our portfolio summary tab. For these others that have 1 EUI and 10 EUI, these ones do fail. I know that I have not enough data, and perhaps this is only common space usage or very limited data in that regard. So I'm going to move these ones over here and I'm going to leave it under me. And then I'm also going to make sure that I think that the all electric flag is correct. So in this case, it's flagging that they think that the property is not all electric, perhaps because there actually is some data within this Energy Star Portfolio Manager record that indicates that there is fossil fuel burning on site. And in this case, it looks like there is not any fossil fuels on site, so it is automatically putting it into all electric bucket. However, you as the user get to choose which one you'd like to do. So in this case, I actually think that this all electric property down here in New Hampshire is not all electric and that there is some on site. And that'll change then when you go to the data tab, what baseline is being applied to it. Specifically one that includes scope 1 direct emissions of fossil fuel being burned on site. One other thing to note that can be done here is that you'll notice that we use eGrid subregion information for our electricity emissions factor. The cell is gray, so typically you're not supposed to edit it, but we've unhidden it and made it visible so that should you decide that you do want to change it, perhaps you have a green energy procurement contract that gives you lower emissions, you can go ahead and do that. So in this case, I'm going to look at this New York City property, and perhaps we're doing some extra work around that property and we want to use a different emissions rate because we know we have to comply with local law 97. I'm actually going to change the emissions factor here to 500, and that will then modify the result in that readout. Please only modify this if you know for sure what your electricity emissions factor is. Otherwise, please leave these as is. Now let's take a look at the incomplete data tab. This tab is really for those who do not have their buildings in Energy Star Portfolio Manager or some sort of other benchmarking platform where you've been able to also collect energy utility data. For those of you who were able to put your entire portfolio in through the whole building data tab, you can skip this section and move on to the next one after this. But for those of you who perhaps have recently acquired a property or you have something missing, this is the place to do it. So you'll notice right here that this is our incomplete data tab. And for any property that you want to include in here, there are several different fields that you need to do that. I'm going to copy and paste an example that we have within the sample file. And that is this Atlanta apartments right here. What I need to include for any properties where I don't have utility data is I need to make sure I include a property name, the postal code, the square footage, whether I think this is an all electric or not all electric building. The year that was built, that's helpful as well. You also need to include the total number of residential living units. And if you know it, the number of bedrooms. And then indicate whether this is a low-rise, mid-rise, or high-rise building. Why do we need all of this information? We need it to ensure that we are categorizing this property as best as we can to baseline information that are behind the scenes. And that's based on both the size of the building, the number of units and bedrooms, whether there's fossil fuel on site, and then the square footage. And behind the scenes, that'll do a calculation and give you an assumption of how much energy you're using, and then therefore how much carbon emissions are associated with it. Now that you've completed your data input through the whole building data tab or incomplete data tab, it's time to ensure that everything that you expect to be included in your portfolio level calculations actually is. And we recommend going through the next 3 tabs that I'm going to talk about to ensure that everything that you're expecting to be in that calculation actually is. Let's start with this renewable energy tab and how it's set up. And just so you know, the other 2 tabs are set up similarly. So specifically on this, you'll start with, as you scroll down, information that has been collected through all of that property level input. As you can see here, it's saying that there is only one property within the examples I have provided through the whole building data and the incomplete data tab that has renewable energy on it. And here's the total amount associated with that's being generated. Now, I know that that's actually not correct and that there are other assets that I really want to include in here that are not showing up. So I have 2 options at this point. You can go back to that property level information, figure out what property it is that's missing, and add it in there. Or if I don't have that information available, or I'm not quite sure, exactly what that is and don't feel comfortable putting it in that property level data tab, I can come down here to the second section where I can add in an asset based on, the size of the system or whatever. So in this case, I'm going to go ahead and add in an asset. Let's add in this New York solar asset. The postal code is the same one as the property that I have put in the whole building tab. And if I'd like to, I can specifically associate it with the property as well. So in this case, I can look through all of the properties I have available, and I am going to associate it with this New York City apartments property. In this case, this will actually impact your property level calculations. So if you leave it blank, it will just impact your overall portfolio calculations, not impact an individual property. Then you go in here and you select what type of asset this is. So this is going to be on site and behind the meter. And the annual generation of this is approximately, we'll say it's a 10,000 kilowatt per hour. And in this case, though, we're only maintaining 50% of the renewable energy certificates. If you want to learn more about what each of these things mean, there's some information here, as well as we recommend going to EPA's website. Now, when I scroll back up, you can see that I now have 2 assets here, and that my totals have been updated based on the information that I put in the table. So this is a way to ensure that you have all the information that you need in order to really calculate that portfolio level calculations. We found this to be really important because of the different ownership structures around renewable energy assets and how they're not all showing up in the way that we would expect them to in some of our energy benchmarking platforms. So make sure to check this tab, especially if you have renewable energy assets, various parts of your portfolio. Now let's briefly touch on the direct emissions tab. Like the renewable energy tab, this is a place for you to verify information and then add in anything that perhaps isn't showing up on the property level side of things. So in this case, you'll see that there's a lot of gray cells here that are automatically calculating information that you could potentially use to better understand how much fossil fuel you're using, what types, based on information that you put in on those different properties. However, if you also want to include other additional optional fuel information, scroll down to the bottom of this tab and you'll see the table down here where you can enter that in. What are some cases where you might want to enter data in? Well, if you perhaps have generators on site that are using gas or propane or some other fossil fuel, you may want to quantify that. Also, if you perhaps have a fleet of vehicles where you'd like to include that information in, landscaping equipment, anything that may use any fossil fuels on site that you would like to accommodate within these calculations, this is the place to put it. In the calculator, we allow you to select which type of fuel you would like to include in here. In this case, let's do gasoline, and then select your unit of measurement. I'll do gallons. And then in here, you can put in your fuel quantity. Let's say that there were 100 gallons that we used. This will then be added into the total of your portfolio and will be summarized basically in that portfolio summary tab. After you've reviewed the direct emissions tab, navigate over to the last tab, which is the indirect emissions tab. This tab, like the previous 2, provides a summary of information that you've shared through the whole building data and the incomplete data tab. In addition, if you put any water information in your whole building data tab, this information will show up here. There are carbon emissions associated with water treatment and delivery of water both to the building and then when it leaves the building. This information, your carbon emissions calculated from this, is not included in that portfolio summary. However, we thought it was important to note that it did exist, and it is something that's important that we start tracking, especially as we're thinking more comprehensively about understanding the actual carbon emissions of each property and then across the portfolio. So this is a place where you can see it here. In addition, if there is any additional water use or additional electricity use that you would like to account for that does not show up in property level data, you have a place to input it here. Congratulations. Now you've finally reached the end of doing data collection, input, and verification. You can go ahead and navigate to the Portfolio Summary tab that's highlighted in yellow. This is what it looks like here, and it's going to give you information that is organized how the DOE's Better Climate Challenge report is. This information can be used for a variety of different things. So you'll find here that there's basic information like your total carbon emissions, the year in which you've done the calculation for, as well as your scope 1 and scope 2, carbon emissions intensity recorded in, intensity per square foot, so on and so on. Additionally, if you scroll a little bit further down, we have provided some portfolio summary visualizations as well, which breaks out both your scope 1 and scope 2 emissions and some pie charts, as well as also detailing out what is whole building data versus what is incomplete data, in order to give you a better perspective on what percentage of the data you can rely on as factual according to utility bills and what is assumed and you might want to have some caveats around. In addition, you can start looking at what your different fuel types are and those other things. This information is here to help you better understand your baseline, and as you're trying to select your baseline year, perhaps what your 2017 baseline looks like compared to your 2018, compared to your 2019, and so on. This calculator is a free tool available for you. We hope that it has been of use, and for any feedback, again, please don't hesitate to reach out to our sustainability at safenet.org. Thank you again for watching this tutorial, and we hope this tool is useful for you.